Peyton Manning is paid an hourly rate of $18.75 plus overtime, which are hours exceeding 40. He is married and claims 3 withholding allowances, and his deductions include FICA, Medicare, federal withholding, state disability insurance, state withholding, credit union savings of $100, and union dues of $25. Find his net pay for a week in January, during which he worked 51 hours. Use the percentage method to calculate federal and state withholding, and use FICA rate of 6.2%, Medicare rate of 1.45%, and an SDI, also known as state disability insurance, rate of 1%. Okay, the first thing I need to do is calculate his gross pay. He gets paid hourly, which is actually more familiar to most of you because that's how most of you get paid right now. Okay, so to find his gross pay, I have to take his regular hours. Okay, he worked 51 hours total. I have to take his regular hours, which are 40, and multiply it by $18.75. And that's going to give me $750. Then to calculate his overtime, I have to find his overtime rate, which is $18.75 times 1.5 because he gets paid time and a half for all overtime hours. And then I'm going to multiply that number by 11. Now remember, you have to round this first before you multiply it by 11, or you may have a tiny little mistake. If you multiply this and round it, you get $28.13. That's his overtime rate. Multiply those two and you get $309.43. So he made $750 in his regular hours, and he made $309.43 in his overtime hours. The gross, if you add those two together, is $1,059.43. That's his gross. Now, after you calculate gross, you have to calculate your deductions. Remember, I'm going to make you list your deductions. So go into the problem and just list them. I have FICA, Medicare, federal, state disability, also known as SDI, state, credit union, and union. Remember, credit union and union are just a fixed amount, so you can go ahead and just write those in, and that's all you have to do with those until you calculate your total deductions. I'm going to go ahead and do federal and state first. You can do either one first, but now we just have to go through and calculate them all. To calculate federal, we need our federal charts. Let's remember, which chart is your federal chart that I shared with you in Google Drive? It's the only one that says federal. There is only one federal chart, and it looks like this. Once we open that federal chart, we need to find Table 5. Table 5 tells us how much we take out in Step 1. Okay? Peyton gets paid weekly, so I'm going to use the top line in Table 5, weekly, and he takes $76.90 out of his pay to calculate adjusted gross per withholding. How many withholdings does Peyton have? He's married and claims 3 withholding allowances. So I'm going to take $76.90 times 3. That is Step 1. Which gives me $230.70. Step 2, I have to take that number out of my gross pay to get my adjusted gross pay. So Step 2, I'm going to take $1,059.43, subtract out $230.70, and that's going to give me $828.73. Step 3, that is where I'm going to use my magic formula, x plus y times a minus z. X, y, and z come from the table, the federal tables. A comes from Step 2. So I'm going to go back to my federal tables, scroll down until I can see where it's weekly married. Percentage method up at top, and then I look for weekly, married. Peyton is weekly or married, and he gets paid weekly. I have to find out where step 2 fits in this chart. 828.73 fits in between 520 and 1,606. So he has to pay $35.50 plus 15% of anything over 520. These are the numbers for X, Y, and Z in that magic formula. X is $35.50, Y is 15%, Z is 520. A comes from step 2, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I have $35.50, 25%, or I'm sorry, 15%. Did I read that wrong? Of anything over 520, step 2 was 828.73. Solve that using order of operations. I subtract first. That gives me 308.73 times 15%. Multiply first. I get 46.31 plus 35.50. And that gives me 81.81 are his federal withholdings. Now I'm going to go ahead and do state. State withholdings. How do I know which chart to use for state withholdings? It's the one that says Ohio and percentage. That's how I know which chart in Google Drive I'm going to use. Ohio and percentage. Because Ohio is the state, and the percentage method is the one I told you to use. Ohio, percentage, Ohio up at the top. Scroll down, we're using the percentage method. He gets paid weekly, and married and single doesn't matter for Ohio. But here is where we get the number for step 1 on this chart. Okay, this number is 1250. How many withholdings does Peyton have? 3. So I'm going to take 1250 times 3. And that's going to give me $37.50. Step 2, you have to find your adjusted gross earnings. You take your gross and subtract out step 1. My gross was $1,059.43 minus $37.50, which gives me $1,021.93. Step 3, always step 3 is where you use your magic formula for percentage method. X plus Y times A minus Z. Go back to your chart and figure out where 1,021.93 fits. 1,021.93 fits right here on the gray line. 1925 is X. 3.894% is Y. 769.20 is Z. I plug those in. I get part A from step 2. 1925 plus 3.894%. Step 2 is 1,021.93 minus 769.20. Go ahead and calculate. Do what's in percent, or the parentheses first, thank you. And I get 252.70 times 3.894% plus 1925. Make sure you multiply first by order of operations, and I get $9.84 plus 1925. Add those two up, and I get $29.09. That is your state withholding. Now, I just have to calculate my 3 percentages. FICA is 6.2% of your gross. So I take my gross, 1,059.43 times 6.2% gives me 65.68. 1,059.43 times 1.45% gives me 15.36. 1,059.43 times 1% gives me $10.59. Now we have to find the total amount of the deductions. So I'm going to add all these numbers up. I have 25 plus 100 plus 2909 plus 1059 plus 8181 plus 1536 plus 6568. That gives me $327.53. How do I find my net pay? Take your gross pay, $1,059.43, and subtract out $327.53, and your final answer is $731.90. That is your net pay.